Hello, I'm Dr. Q. Welcome to my channel. This is the 17th class of Principles of Economics. In this video, I will cover the market structure of monopoly. In this lecture, we'll learn to answer questions such as what is monopolist? How do they decide on the output quantity and the pricing of the product? If government wants to regulate a monopolist, what do they do? Is there any unique pricing strategy monopolists can utilize to maximize profit? A monopoly exists when a specific business or firm is the only supplier of a particular commodity. In order to avoid the attention from the Department of Justice or any antitrust agent, firms do not go out and tell people that they are monopolists. They normally tone down their monopoly power. For example, Luxottica Group is an Italian eyewear conglomerate and the world's largest company in eyewear industry. It is based in Milan, Italy. The company is vertically integrated, which means it does not only design and produce eyewear, it also has control on the upstream raw material as well as the downstream distribution and retails of eyewear. You may think you have many brands to choose from when purchasing glasses, but they are mainly produced by this one company. And it seems like there are plenty of retailers to shop for the glasses, but they are also owned by Luxottica. Another example is De Beers Jewelers. It is an international corporation that specializes in diamond exploitation, mining, retail, trading, and industrial diamond manufacturing sectors. You may say, hey, I have never heard of it. I know the fancy brands such as Tiffany, Cartier, Harry Winston, Graf, or some more cost-friendly brands such as Blumel, Zeal, or local shops. Well, people know about diamonds and would like to buy or have a diamond engagement ring is because of De Beers' successful advertisements to educate people in generations to believe so. One of the most effective marketing strategies has been the marketing of diamonds as a symbol of love and commitment. The most famous advertising slogan is "A diamond is forever." De Beers owns diamond mines in Botswana, Namibia, and Canada. In the 1980s, De Beers' market share of rough diamonds was as high as 90%, which means back then, most jewelers in the United States mainly have to purchase their raw material diamonds from De Beers. Now, in order to avoid trouble with the U.S. antitrust agency, it sold a big share of the company. Other examples of monopolies include public utility companies such as natural gas, coal-fired power plants, in small town, cable television or internet provider can also be monopolist. What we learn in this lecture also applies to near monopolies that dominate the production of a good or service. For example, Intel's microprocessors are used in over 80% of global personal computers sold each year. and the company has nearly 100% of the market for servers that are built on PC chips. The waste disposal market is dominated by waste management, as the waste disposal contracts give it market exclusively for 3 to 8 years. Alphabet, better known by its previous name, Google's US search market share is 63.5%, and professional sports teams are legal monopolists or cartel thanks for the sports culture in the state. In plenty of secondary cities or rural area, there's only one airline serving the local airport, and the airline is local monopolist. How do the monopolists establish their monopoly status? They erect barriers to entry, which means they establish some obstacles and make it challenging or impossible for potential competitors to enter and split the market. There are several types of barriers to entry. The first one is economies of scale that we have covered in lecture 14 and 15. Due to the production nature, for example, the coal-fired power plants, the establishment of the firm enables it to produce adequate of goods or services to satisfy the whole market. We don't need to invite another competitor to share the market, which would result in a higher per unit cost. The second one is legal barriers to entry, such as patents that we cover in lecture 16. Licenses are another form of entry barrier. Radio and TV stations are examples of government granting licenses where only one or a few firms are allowed to offer the service. Taxi driver has to achieve medallion to operate, although the monopoly power has been weakened by Uber and Lyft. Ownership or control of essential resources is another barrier to entry. De Beers vertically integrated diamond mines so that it can control all production procedures of diamond jewelry. Company Vale controls the world's nickel reserves. Professional sports leagues control player contracts and leases on major city stadiums. Therefore, they have control of the essential resources for the sports service. The last way of erecting barriers to entry for potential competitor is criticized a lot and most scrutinized by the antitrust agency. That's pricing and anti-competitive behavior. For example, in order to deter the entry of low-cost carriers, such as Southwest, on routes centered on Dallas, American Airlines reduced its own fares and increasing the number of flights serving the routes, and successfully attracted all the consumers and left no business for low-cost carriers. Therefore, low-cost carriers failed to establish itself as a durable market presence and were forced out of the markets. After the low-cost carrier ceased operations, American General resumed its prior marketing strategy and reduced the number of flights and raised its prices, roughly to the level comparable to those prior to the period of low-fare competition. This is a predatory pricing. Microsoft was sued for forcing computer makers to include its Internet browser as a part of the installation of Windows software. American Express was found guilty of not allowing merchants that accepted American Express from promoting other credit cards, like Visa or MasterCard. Amazon limits the ability of some competitors to promote their rival smart speakers, video doorbells, and other devices on its dominant e-commerce platform. Let's summarize the characteristics of a monopoly. For a monopoly market, there is one producer or seller for the product or service. There is no close substitute for the product or service the monopolists offer. If consumers want to or need to consume the good or service, they have to resort to the monopolist to purchase. Consumers do not have any alternative options to choose from. They can choose to buy and have to buy from this monopolist, or choose not to buy or consume at all. Because of this, monopolist has enormous power in controlling and manipulating the price, and the entry of new firms is blocked so monopolists can enjoy long-run profit. Because there is no competitor, monopolists does not need to engage in price competition like the firms in perfect competition that have to lower price to attract buyers. Monopolists does engage in non-price competition, such as doing advertisement or sponsorship to promote the awareness of the brand in order to build up positive enterprise figure to attract consumers. Because the monopolist is the sole seller of the good or service in the industry, and consumers do not have any alternative options to choose from, the demand monopolist faces is the market demand, which can be expressed with a downward sloping curve. Therefore, in order to sell more output quantity, monopolist has to lower its price for all the goods and services. Monopolist has power in manipulating price by changing its output. If the monopolist wants to charge a high price, it can achieve the goal by making the output very scarce. Which means the monopolist produces at a very low quantity. If the monopolist wants to sell more output, it has to lower the price. That's defined by the law of demand. That also tells us that although not facing any competition rival, monopolists cannot do whatever it wants to do. The market is still defined by the interaction of the seller and consumers. Therefore, the monopolist won't do anything like charging a crazy high price and then discourage all consumers. In Lecture 15, Short-Run Perfect Competition, we know that there are so many similar firms in the perfect competition industry. One firm can sell as many or as few as it wants to and able to at the prevailing market price. That guarantees the firm's marginal revenue equals market price. But in monopoly, monopolist's marginal revenue is less than the price. For example, if the monopolist originally produces at 4 units of output, and therefore the price consumers are willing to accept is $110. The total revenue is the product of the two, which is $440. If the monopolist wants to sell an extra output from 4 to 5, then the price consumers can accept is $100. Please note that it does not mean that monopolists can charge the first 4 units at a higher price of 110 and then charge the fifth at a lower price of 100. Instead, monopolist has to charge all 5 units at a lower price of $100, including the first 4 that he could have sold at 110 if output is 4. Therefore, from output quantity 4 to 5, the monopolist loses $10 for each of the first 4 units. Meanwhile, the monopolist gains extra revenue of $100 from the 5th unit. The rest parts overlap. The gain, $100, minus the loss, $40, is the marginal revenue of $60. We can get the same result by calculating the total revenue difference. Total revenue at output of 5 is $500. The marginal revenue of the 5th unit is $60, which is smaller than corresponding price of $100. We can formalize this by data and graphical expression. The first 2 columns compose the market demand, as well as the demand faced by the monopolist. The product of quantity and price is total revenue. And from total revenue, we can then calculate marginal revenue associated with each additional quantity. The horizontal comparison between marginal revenue and price confirms the conclusion that marginal revenue is smaller than the price except for the first point. Combined with the cost information of the firm, we can calculate the economic profit for each output level. From observing the profit variable, it is obvious that when output is 5, the economic profit is maximized, like any other firm on the globe. Monopolist is established to maximize profit. Although monopolist has power in controlling and manipulating price, the profitability is still partially defined by the market demand, which is composed by consumers. Monopolists will consider market demand and choose the optimal price or output that maximizes the economic profit. Before discussing the profit maximization in depth, let's look at the market demand and the marginal revenue curves. The negative portion of marginal revenue does not have much of economic meaning, so let's focus on the positive part. The flatter blue line is the demand curve, while the steeper orange line is the marginal revenue. We can see that they start from the same point. Afterwards, marginal revenue is always below the demand curve, which means at a given output, the marginal revenue is smaller than price. Actually, for a straight demand curve, the absolute value of slope of marginal revenue is always twice as big as the absolute value of slope of demand curve. For example, if slope of demand is -2, then its marginal revenue slope is -4. If slope of demand is -0.5, then its marginal revenue slope is -1. It is a universal rule that firm will produce at output quantity where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And we know for a fact that marginal cost is bigger than 0. So in order to be equal to marginal cost, marginal revenue has to be larger than 0. So we know the monopolist will price its products somewhere at this area. In Lecture 10, we learned that when marginal revenue is larger than 0, total revenue increases as output increases. Demand is elastic. Therefore, monopolists always set its price in the elastic region of the demand curve. It can set the price and say at that price how many units of output consumers are willing or able to buy, or produce at an output and say the price consumers are willing to pay. In that sense, monopolist is different from perfect commutation firm, who is price taker. Monopolist is price maker. Let's resume the profit maximization topic. We surely can figure out the profit maximization output after calculating the profit for each output level. Alternatively, we use the marginal revenue equals marginal cost universal rule. So step 1, determine the profit maximizing output by finding where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, and this is the point. This point defines the optimal output quantity. So from this point, we trace down onto quantity axis to find the output level, trace up to find the corresponding price, and the average cost. This is the second step. From here, we can use total revenue minus the total cost. The difference is economic profit. Alternatively, we can use the per unit profit multiply the quantity to calculate the economic profit. The method here has been fully covered in Lecture 15, time point 22 minutes 20 seconds. It is noteworthy that in monopoly market, for a given market demand, there is just one supply point. A monopolist cannot trace a short-term supply curve like perfect commutation firm because for a given price, there is not a unique quantity supplied. For example, if the market demand changes and the market revenue changes correspondingly to this level, this is a crossing point of marginal revenue and marginal cost. Compared with the previous one, the output level is the same, but the price level is higher. So the new supply point shares the same output quantity, but it has a different price level. This violates the one-to-one relationship between price and the quantity supplied for supply curve. Another unique thing is that monopolists can earn positive economic profit in the short run as well as long run. It does not provide us more economic insights to differentiate short run from long run for monopolists. Secondly, the monopolist does not always earn a positive economic profit. Sometimes the market condition is not good, market demand and total revenue is low, or the monopolist has a high cost because it tries to explore a new market. The output defined by the crossing point has a higher average cost than the price. The monopolist bears an economic loss. In Lecture 16, we learned that perfect computation is the most efficient market structure as consumers and producer surpluses are maximized. And we also learned that the supply curve for perfect computation firm in the short run is the portion of upward sloping marginal cost that is above the shutdown point. And the market supply is simply the summation of all horizontal supply curves of firms within. And the monopolist only has marginal cost curve as opposed to supply curve. So, in order to compare the market structures across perfect computation and monopoly, instead of using supply curve, we use marginal cost curve. In monopoly, the output quantity is defined by the crossing point of marginal revenue and marginal cost, and trace up from the output quantity to demand curve to find the price consumers are willing to pay, compared with the price and quantity level in perfect computation. The monopoly price is higher than perfect computation price, while the monopoly quantity is lower than perfect computation quantity. Besides, as consumer surplus is the area below demand curve and above price, so consumer surplus in monopoly is this little bitty triangle. Producer surplus is the area below price and above marginal cost, represented by this trapezoid area. Compared with the perfect computation in monopoly market, the society is losing this triangle area. Consumers do not get it, producer doesn't get it, so the triangle area is called the social dead weight loss, DWL. This is the inefficiency in monopoly market. On top of that, this yellow area is part of a consumer surplus in perfect computation, but now is part of a producer surplus. This means income distribution is more unequal than it would be under a more competitive situation. Thus, monopoly power transfers income from the consumers to the business owners, which results in a redistribution of income to the higher income business owners. As there is no competition pressure from rival firms, and the monopolist normally enjoys economic profit, monopolists may not care about cost savings as much as the perfect computation firms. So as opposed to produce with the least cost, waste of resources may occur, which results in monopolists producing at a higher cost. Monopolist does not achieve production efficiency. On top of that, monopolist is involved in rent-seeking behavior, which is the worst inefficiency. Rent-seeking means seeking to increase one's share of existing wealth without creating or producing anything. For example, monopolist hires people on lobbying government, pass favorable policies to the monopolist, or to impose regulations on competitors in order to increase market share. The factors contributing to the government bans against the foreign technology companies are multiple, but the potential bigger economic profit the competing firms in a state could enjoy plays a big role. There surely are some concerns associated with monopolists. Monopolists may erect entry barriers for potential competitor or conduct something improper to get rid of rival firms so that it maintains the monopolist status to enjoy the whole market, rip off consumers, and reap exclusive profit. But it's not necessarily true that monopolist is only associated with insanely high profit and conspiracy. As we learned previously, there are natural monopolists like local utility companies. They're monopolists because of the economies of scale. The production nature enables one firm to produce adequate of goods or services to satisfy the whole market. And because of the economic profit the monopolist enjoys, it can conduct research and development, innovation, and technology advancement that firms in perfect competition cannot do. So, if there are issues associated with a monopoly, what do we do? If the company is involving in the production of non-essential goods or services, we tend to leave it and let technology improvement and rising rival firms get rid of monopoly. The big positive economic profit enjoyed exclusively by the firm in the industry surely provides strong incentives for outsiders to figure out a way to enter despite the challenges or obstacles. While research and technology may initially strengthen monopoly power, over time it is likely to destroy monopoly position. In old days, we talk about Kodak, we think of film. Now its dominating place is replaced by digital alternatives. An Internet Explorer used to be the to-go searching engine, but now there's Google and Apple Safari. For the monopolists that conduct severe anti-competitive behavior, there are antitrust laws. For example, the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 is a United States antitrust law that regulates competition among enterprises. The Sherman Act broadly prohibits anti-competitive agreements and unilateral conduct that monopolize and attempts to monopolize the relevant market. The law attempts to prevent the artificial raising of prices by restriction of trade or supply. The natural monopoly, like we covered in lecture 14, or the innocent monopoly, the monopoly achieved solely by merit, is legal. The purpose of the Sherman Act is not to protect firms from harm from legit, successful competing businesses, nor to prevent businesses from gaining honest profits from consumers, but rather to preserve a competitive marketplace to protect consumers from abuses. So it's hard to judge. It's more of a case-to-case situation. Government uses antitrust laws to break up firms if it needs to. There are several successful cases filed under the Act, like U.S. versus American Tobacco, which split the company into four, Standard Oil Corporation of New Jersey versus United States, which broke up the company based on geography. The case of United States versus AT&T was settled in 1982 and resulted in the breakup of the company. United States versus Microsoft Corporation was settled in 2001 without the breakup of the company. However, there is also unsuccessful case such as Federal Baseball Club versus National League 1922, in which the Supreme Court ruled that Major League Baseball was not interstate commerce and was not subject to the antitrust law. Which is weird, because the baseball games are not commerce, but surely is a service that provides consumers and the providers can profit on. I think the judges were big fans of sports. Lastly, if the government feels that it is more beneficial to the society to have a monopoly such as utility company, then government will regulate it. Regulate in this context means that monopolies cannot do the things they need to do to maximize the profit. Government intervenes in the decisions. Instead of letting monopolies decide on output quantity and therefore price, government steps in and decide the price. How does government determine the price? Government will set the price where the monopolies happen to break even, which is the crossing point of demand curve and average total cost curve. The crossing point defines the output monopolies produces and the price consumers are going to pay. The price consumer pays is equal to corresponding average cost. Economic profit monopolist earns is therefore zero. This price level is called fair return price. This all sounds perfect, but there is an issue related to the fair return price. Under this setting, monopolist is guaranteed to get its costs covered. Then it loses its incentive to minimize its production costs. Instead of using the right machine or production line to maximize profit, it may install super big and fancy facility as the costs are paid by consumers. There's research showing that regulated coal-fired power plants do not negotiate the price of coal as low as their deregulated counterparts. Duke Energy lost its lawsuit of polluting groundwater with coal ash in North Carolina in 2018. Duke Energy responded the high cost of cleanup and settlement with increasing electricity rate. Because of the monopoly power, monopolists can utilize some fancy pricing strategy to get a more economic profit. The one I briefly cover here is price discrimination. What's the meaning of price discrimination? Discrimination means treating people differently based upon their race, gender, or age. Price discrimination means charging different people different prices based upon their unique characteristics as consumers. But if we use price differential as the sign for price discrimination, we can find too many. For example, for the same size and type of chips, the convenience store at the corner of the street probably charges you more than Walmart does. If you talk to the store owner, however, he or she probably say, well, we're not Walmart. We don't have their big trucks. We don't have their distribution system. We have higher costs in operating a store, and we're more likely to be robbed. So price differential shouldn't be the sign for price discrimination. Instead, price discrimination is defined as charging different prices to different buyers when such price differences are not justified by cost differences. If price-cost difference on one consumer is different from the price-cost on another consumer, there is evidence for price discrimination. If I and my students go to a movie theater and watch a movie, my student can show his or her student ID and enjoys a discount. While I'm not a student, I have to pay full price. The movie theater price discriminates against me in front of my face. If you take a flight and check with your neighbor, more than likely that you two paid different prices for the ticket. Airlines conduct all types of price discrimination and attracts plenty of research. One of them is airlines tend to charge business travelers higher price than they charge the leisure travelers. Why? Because businessmen have inelastic demand. Your boss asks you to fly to Dallas this Tuesday for a meeting. You have to fly to Dallas this Tuesday. You cannot check the flight ticket and tell your boss, hey, the ticket on Tuesday is pretty pricey, and how about I fly in Thursday instead? On top of that, businessmen probably won't care about the price because their companies are going to pay for it. So business travelers are not sensitive or responsive to price change, so airlines tend to charge them a higher price. On the other hand, for leisure travelers, they pay out of pocket. They probably have some wiggle room on the dates of traveling, and they can plan ahead of time. Leisure travelers are more sensitive to price change, and airlines tend to charge them a lower price. The economic graphical expression is this: elastic demand, inelastic demand. For the same firm, such as an airline, the cost of production or service is assumed the same across consumer groups. The cost of serving a business traveler is the same as cost of serving a leisure traveler. For inelastic demand, the crossing point of marginal revenue and marginal cost defines a higher price than the one for elastic demand. In order to successfully practice price discrimination, firms have to have monopoly power. Consumers do not have cheap alternatives to choose from, and firms are able to segregate consumers apart based upon the willingness to pay. Movie theaters can tell students and seniors apart from the rest of the consumers by checking their IDs. Airlines can tell consumers apart by advance purchase and the duration of the trip, etc. And there is no arbitrage or resale. If I and my student go to a movie theater, my student pays $8 for the ticket while I have to pay $15 for it. I can simply meet him or her at parking lot, pay him anywhere between $8 to $15 so that I save some and my student earns some. Then price discrimination fails. In order to prevent that, movie theaters check IDs and airlines do not allow ticket transfer. Sometimes, firms cannot tell consumers apart explicitly. Then they offer different options and let consumers self-select. For example, there are different sizes of soda and detergent. The people who buy the products in big bulk probably have a big family, while the people who buy a personal container are bachelors or bachelorettes. Consumers will self-select themselves into paying different per unit price, and people who go through the coupons and click them having more time in hand and are more sensitive to price, and they pay lower price with the coupons. Alright, that's all I have for this video. In next lecture, I'll start macroeconomics. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, or save the video, and subscribe my channel for more lectures in economics.